26 years ago this month, Apple released the first Beatles Anthology album. Begun by Neil Aspinall in 1970 as a film project called The Long and Winding Road, this was the project Beatles fans had waited 25 years to see. Issued 2 days after the first TV special had aired as a double CD and triple vinyl set, it contained over 2 hours of archive material from radio, television and the Abbey Road archives, most of which was previously unreleased. With the help of primary source notes from the project, I'll look at exactly how this album evolved from a list of possibilities to the final running order. Also, what was left out and why. I'm Andrew from Parlogram Auctions, and welcome to the making of the Beatles Anthology Volume 1. Rumours of what existed in the Beatles' vaults had been circulating for many years, but the news that Apple was to release 150 previously unreleased Beatles tracks generated incredible excitement amongst fans. Riding high on the success of the Live at the BBC album a year earlier, head of Apple Neil Aspinall felt confident about Anthology's chances of success. The first of the series, Anthology 1, was released on November 21st, 1995. It contains 60 tracks covering the years from the pre-Beatles Quarrymen days up to and including the Beatles for Sale album in December 1964. The project was headed and overseen by the Beatles' original studio team of George Martin and engineer Geoff Emerick. They were assisted by Abbey Road's Alan Rowse, senior mastering engineer Peter Mew, as well as experts such as Mark Lewison and, more importantly, Paul, George and Ringo themselves. But like most projects of this type, it was limited by the poor archive policy of EMI and the BBC in the 1960s, when a huge number of recordings and tapes were reused or just junked. After all the archives had been searched, including the personal ones of the team themselves, they ended up with around 600 individual recordings at their disposal. It was then Martin and Emmerick's job to select the best of those to use on the albums. Abbey Road's gatekeeper Alan Rowse had copied all of the Beatles studio tapes held at EMI onto digital tapes as a safety backup in 1988. These were then handed to Geoff Emerick to work with. Not liking how those digital tapes sounded, Emerick demanded that everything be mixed down to quarter-inch tape and played back at 30 IPS on a Studer A80. He then set about mixing them on a vintage 1970 EMI TG 12345 Series Mark II mixing desk, via some vintage Fairchild 660 limiters. The only modern equipment in his control room were his Meyer HD1 monitors. But Emerick still wasn't happy with the sound, so he had EMI refurbish and recommission their original echo chambers. The first major highlight of the project was when Paul, George and Ringo attended the sessions for the first time on March 31st, 1995. They spent the day listening to some archive recordings and generally just wandered around the building like they'd never left. With all of his equipment duly installed in Abbey Road's penthouse suite, mixing sessions began in earnest on May 22nd, 1995. On one of Paul's first visits to the sessions on May 30th, they were about to listen to the Decca Audition tape. Alan Rowse had prepared the freshly baked tape, which would be transferred onto digital at the same time, in case the tape shed its oxide coating. As the tape began playing, they realised it was running fast, so Paul went down to the studio and pitched the music on the tape to the piano. After listening to it and transferring it to tape, they played Paul mixes from their past week's work, which he said he liked. Paul was accompanied that day by his 17-year-old son James, and explained at length to him how the Beatles recorded in the studio, showing him the newly refurbished echo chamber in the process. With McCartney gone, Geoff Emerick and his assistant Paul Hicks, who remains involved in current Beatles projects, set out mixing and sketching out a track listing. By June 12th, Emerick had come up with the first draft track listing. The speech elements were yet to be finalised, so this first draft included just the songs up for consideration. Interestingly, no mention is made at this point of starting the album with Free as a Bird. Instead, the first album kicks off with That'll Be the Day and In Spite of All the Danger, which are marked on this as being from Paul's tape. The next track is marked as being the Silver Beatles in rehearsal doing Hallelujah I Love Her So, which also appeared on the finally released album. Next up for inclusion were the 3 Polydor recordings made in Hamburg, marked with a note to specifically use the German introduction to My Bonnie. However, the version which was used on the released album uses the English introduction to that song. The Decca Audition from January 1962 was originally planned to feature heavily on this album, and 12 of the 15 tracks recorded for that session were all up for consideration. Another track which was in the frame from early on, but which didn't make the final cut, was Dream Baby from the Beatles' first BBC radio session on March 7, 1962. This was also accompanied on this early track list by 2 tracks from the 11th of June BBC session, Ask Me Why and A Picture of You, both of which didn't make it to the final album, mainly I guess due to their poor sound quality. Also under consideration at this stage were the 2 Granada recordings from the 22nd of August and 5th of September 1962 of Some Other Guy and Kansas City. Some Other Guy was the favourite to be included at this stage. It's odd that considering the lack of recordings from the Star Club included on the final release, no less than 6 tracks from those recordings of December 31st, 1962 were earmarked to kick off Disc 2. The first and favourite being My Girl Is Red Hot, sung by George. A note was made beside this title which says, Paul likes it, and although the end is cut off, I think we should use it. This would have been followed by I Saw Her Standing There, Red Sails in the Sunset, and John singing Sweet Little 16. Nothing Shaking But the Leaves on the Trees and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby were deemed to be okay and rough, but with a good atmosphere, and were marked as U's. Following the One After 909 session, which was in from the start, were the 1963 London Palladium performances. The source of this tape is marked as being from the founder of the Russ Conway Appreciation Society, Bill Murden. On these notes, I'll Get You was marked as being a semitone flat, but She Loves You was okay. In the end, only I'll Get You was used, and She Loves You was taken from the Royal Variety Show performance from November 4th. Early plans were to include all the performances from this show, but in the end, From Me to You was dropped. Next on this early running order were the 4 tracks from the Morecambe and Wise show from December 2nd, which shows how much of a favourite they were right from the start. Although the Beatles had performed This Boy on that show, the team were keen to include an EMI studio recording of that track. The running order noted to use the little bit of speech before take 10, and John's bloody little mic quip before take 11. A good giggle was also noted at the end of take 13. Take 14 was marked as complete and not bad, interesting, use. Although it didn't make it onto the final album, an EMI studio recording of This Boy did emerge on the CD single of Free as a Bird, which was marked as being taken from takes 12 and 13. Next up for consideration was the Paris recordings, with take 2 of Can't Buy Me Love being the favourite, with a note to use take 2, but to edit in the solo from take 1, which is exactly how it appeared on the final album. Initially, there was no place for All My Loving from Ed Sullivan. Initially, it was I Want to Hold Your Hand from the 11th of February Washington concert. This was then to be followed by 2 demos by John of I'm Happy Just to Dance With You and If I Fell, which were credited on the notes to their chauffeur Alf Bicknell. The If I Fell demo has since emerged, but what about the I'm Happy Just to Dance With You demo? Let me know if you've heard it. On And I Love Her, it was noted that take 1 was a breakdown, but good and should be used together with a complete take 2. A Hard Day's Night with its quote, twee pull middle 8 was voted in, as was I'll Be Back, using take 2 and fading into take 3. Then came recordings from a recently discovered session tape from June 3rd, 1964, which was recorded after a rehearsal session with Jimmy Nicol and contained George's unreleased track You Know What to Do. The second song on that tape was a version of You're My World, which had been a #1 hit for Cilla Black in May 1964. On this recording, Paul led John and George through a brief off-the-cuff rendition of the song, which lasted only 30 seconds and was dropped from the release version of the album, never to be heard of again. They also recorded a spoof version of No Reply at this session, next to which was noted on here as being pretty dreadful but unique and essential to use. The final 3 tracks slated for this album kicked off with Kansas City, take 2. Great vocal from Paul, no overdubs. Mr. Moonlight, take 1, good speech with breakdown, edit into take 4, use. The track planned to end this album at this stage was Leave My Kitten Alone. Written next to this was the instruction to use take 5, which is best, and that all earlier takes are in a lower key. So despite Emmerich having already mixed this track for the Sessions album, it looks like he had another go at it here. This was a fast-moving project, and by June the 21st, they'd whittled down to what we've just looked at into a tentative running order. The first reel now included Paul's instrumental KN, and a note beside the Decca Audition tracks said to remove the fuzz distortion on the recording caused by Paul's overloaded bass. The Decca tracks were still at this point a major part of this first disc, but were now reduced to 11 by the removal of Take Good Care of My Baby, which was marked as having too many pops. Hello Little Girl was noted as having them too, but that stayed in. The first album would then end on the still in favour BBC recording of Dream Baby and the June 6 EMI recordings of Love Me Do and Besame Mucho, which had just been added. This running order now saw the first inclusion of the 5 Swedish recordings from October 1963, of which all were added at the expense of the Palladium recording of She Loves You. The EMI recording of This Boy was still included, and was to be followed by the Morecambe and Wise show tracks. The next set of notes I have are dated 5 days later, on June the 26th, which is the point where the speech tracks were added. It shows that the first album now opened with John's We Were Just Four Guys speech, which was going to be underlaid by a snatch of the Quarrymen's performance of Baby Let's Play House. EMI had recently bought the tape of this at Sotheby's in September 1994 for a record £78,500. However, there is a telling note beneath this on this list, which reads, "Now dubious. Check with Yoko." Obviously, there was something they or Yoko didn't like about it, and it ended up not being used on the released album. There is a clip of it available to listen to on YouTube, so take a listen to it yourself and tell me what you think. In addition to the 12 Decca Audition tracks which still remained, there was a new recording of I Saw Her Standing There, which was marked as not Decca, provenance at the moment unknown. Any ideas? The Hamburg tapes also still featured strongly, with My Girl Is Red Hot being the red hot favourite for inclusion. Shimmy Shimmy, Reminiscing and Red Sails in the Sunset were deemed not of sufficient quality to use, but Sweet Little 16 and Nothing Shaking But the Leaves on the Trees and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby remained in at this point. Lend Me Your Comb was marked as doubtful, and Feet's Too Big, I'm Talking About You and Roll Over Beethoven were marked as rough and were jettisoned. 2 days later, on June the 28th, there came another document which was headed Radical Rethink. On it, Free as a Bird makes its first appearance at the head of the running order, and most of the other tracks were in their final places. However, Dream Baby was still in place after the Decca Audition tracks, which had now been reduced to 5 numbers. Also in the running order at this point was John's demo for Billy J. Kramer of Bad to Me, which in the end was replaced by the BBC recording of Lend Me Your Comb. The Bad to Me demo eventually turned up on the short-lived copyright extension album The Beatles Bootleg Recordings in December 2013. Take 14 of This Boy at EMI was also now dropped, presumably because of its inclusion on the Morecambe and Wise show. There was also doubt about the inclusion of I Want to Hold Your Hand from that show, as they clearly still wanted the Washington show performance in at this point. The performances of This Boy and She Loves You from the Paris Olympia show on January the 19th, 1964 also fell at this stage. Included here, sandwiched between Morecambe and Wise and Take 2 of Can't Buy Me Love, was Paul's demo of 1 and 1 is 2. Even at this point, there was still no place for All My Loving from Ed Sullivan. The tracks of choice from the first US visit at this point were Please Please Me and I Want to Hold Your Hand from the Washington concert. This was to be followed by John's demo of I'm Happy Just to Dance With You, which was noted as being rough but usable, a maybe. You Can't Do That from February the 25th was also only a maybe, with a note to use the count-in from the master Take 9. The Around the Beatles TV special was now in, but George's You'll Know What to Do was in danger of missing the cut and was now marked as maybe. It's clear the team, like John and Paul, had difficulty working out what to do with 8 days a week. The original plan was, according to these notes, to fade takes 1 and 2 after 35 seconds, add 1 minute of take 3, then take 4 into the whole of take 5. The release sequence ended up being similar, but omitted anything from take 3. Although in the end the next 4 tracks were not released until Anthology 2, it seems they had been slated to end this album. The plan for Yes It Is was to use Take 2 with John's guide vocal and mix that into a cappella vocals from the master take. That would have been interesting. You've Got to Hide Your Love Away was fixed, but If You've Got Trouble was at this point still marked as a maybe. The second disc was then planned to end with the 20th of February 1965 mix of That Means a Lot, which would be Take 1 mixed into Take 24. In the end, all of the 1965 tracks were shelved for Anthology 2, which I'll cover in a future video. This is an album which has generated so much debate and discussion over the years, so please do let me know in the comments what you think about it and what you would have liked to have seen included from these notes. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into this great album and that you'll come back again for the next video, which will be about, well, wait and see. In the meantime, do check out our website parlogramauctions.com, or consider subscribing or even becoming a channel member, which will get you exclusive content and early access to all of our videos. But that's it for this one, so I'll say bye for now and thanks for watching.